God damn, the wonder of cinema is alive in 2022, which is really impressive coming off the heels of 2021, which was a jam-packed year for movies in its own right. And yet, this year, we've had The Batman, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Glass Onion, Elvis, Top Gun Maverick, even the low-key dramatic masterpieces like Tar or The Fabelmans or The Banshees of Inisherin, which have all played perfectly with my love of the wonder and infinite potential of cinema. I've been so spoiled at the theater this year that my favorite film of 2022 has changed hands several times. But as this final month of the year kicks off, finally unleashed upon my cinematic tapestry was the film that I believe is going to carry the gold the rest of the way, at least for me. It's a film that puts forth the notion that everything is a remix, a scathing indictment of modern Hollywood debauchery through the lens of the dying days of the silent era, a tragic tale of superstardom and movie making, all bundled into a story that could only be delivered by one of my favorite filmmakers working today, Damien Chazelle, and that film is Babylon. This thing is a miracle of movie making, even though it's a scathing indictment of the show business machine, which makes a movie like Babylon possible in the first place. And now that I've gotten to experience the full 3-hour craziness that is Babylon, I've got to just gush about its performances, its spectacle, its unfiltered vision, courtesy of one of the 21st century's most captivating filmmakers, the cornucopia of elements which merge together to make Babylon a masterpiece. And Damien Chazelle's boldest, biggest swing that we've gotten so far. I mean, seriously, this guy just continues to crank out home run after home run, and I'm not ready to say that Babylon is his best film yet, but it's knocking at the door. And fair warning, there are spoilers ahead. But before we get into them, are you having trouble bringing your most incredible artistic idea to life? Well, let me tell you about Wonder, an app that turns words into mesmerizing digital artworks. All you need to do is enter a prompt, pick an art style, and watch Wonder bring your idea to life in seconds. Describe what you want Wonder to paint, such as life under the sea or shattered rainbow. Pick a style, whether it's impressionistic or abstract or ultra realistic, and just hit create. You'll see that Wonder's realistic model works insanely well. It's nearly impossible to notice that a human artist didn't create that work. Wonder are giving away a free trial of their premium option at the link in the description below, featuring over 20 art styles, faster generation of your masterpieces, and unlimited usage, all under an ad-free experience. I use Wonder to blow off some steam when I need a break from video editing, and from those moments of downtime, I've created some really cool stuff. Now, I know a lot of you have been in a similar situation where you just want to let your feelings out onto the canvas after a big workload. Well, put those feelings into your prompts and see what comes out. Again, you can go here or click the link in the description below to download Wonder and get a free trial of the premium version, including more than 20 art styles and unlimited ad-free access. Thank you so much to Wonder for sponsoring this video. The first 30 minutes of Babylon are a doozy, and it really sets the stage for the insanity that ensues. I mean, this likely Best Picture nominee basically begins with an elephant literally exploding all over the camera. Hope you were awake before, you sure are now. And why in 1926 is Diego Calva's Manny transporting an elephant through the desert? Why do we witness something so gross? Because it's a metaphor for the shit one has to trudge through in order to make it in Hollywood, of course, especially marginalized people. Well, that and the elephant is part of the festivities for an insane Hollywood rager at a lavish mansion, one which screams that this is the Roaring 20s. There are hundreds of guests, piles of every drug conceivable in 1926, big band jazz, tits, dicks, masks, endless fucking, at least one fatality. Oh, and did I mention there's a fucking elephant? It's the kind of party that would make Stefan in New York's hottest club absolutely blush. But it's also a microcosm of the film itself, of the arcs which all 4 of its principal characters will find themselves on. Manny is an interesting protagonist. I love this character. He's in part used to view old Hollywood through the lens of a person of color's eyes, and he's so unafraid to go as far as he needs to in order to leave his mark on cinema. Manny sees what needs to be done to move the industry forward, even though it's not always, in fact is rarely, sensitive to the artists who helped create it. He's conforming in an effort to uplift marginalized voices in the long long run, even though he sometimes does wrong, as illustrated by when he nudges Sydney, a black performer, to perform in blackface. He does it because he sees himself as promoting Sydney's continued success in Hollywood. Overall, Manny's paving the road with good intentions, and it's more emblematic of the system refusing to change, even though these marginalized voices did everything to make it what it is. He doesn't realize, though, that progress isn't progress if you're trampling over someone, stripping them of their identity and even humanity. But that's the other side of Manny that makes him complicated and, by effect, interesting. He's kind of ruthless. He'll hustle till he drops for an opportunity in Hollywood to do whatever it takes. Get shat on by an elephant, help dispose of a body, or even just hell alive for Nellie Leroy, which eventually shifts his main goal, particularly after he does find success as a producer. He just wants Nellie to fall in love with him the way he fell in love with her that night. He gets her out of a bind, goes through some drug-laden debauchery with her, and expresses a love that just doesn't reciprocate and never will, and is ultimately left watching her leave him behind. Her image that night, now just a memory for him to keep, as he will many years later. Manny falls for Nellie, just like every single person who sees her perform night after night falls for Nellie. And while we're here, let's talk about Nellie Leroy and one of Margot Robbie's absolute best performances. She's a girl from a small town who was told her whole life she wasn't good enough, and that she would amount to nothing. And with one party, one day on a film set, she now has every single last person who ever doubted her and more in the palm of her hand. She's desirable, she's talented, and she has control over her own destiny for now. Nellie doesn't just want to be a star, but the star, to be the center of every conversation in LA and beyond forever, even though she's so clearly a proto-Marilyn Monroe who has buckets of talent but is damaged in just the right way that Hollywood will sap her in 5 seconds and then leave her to her own devices and vices. Nellie, who was once celebrated for being a wild child, is now deemed too crass, too unfiltered, and improper for this new era of talkies, and it inevitably derails her career. The last-ditch effort that is made to give her a future involves stripping away her identity, creating a persona which is constructed until everything that made Nellie interesting in the first place is gone. Audiences are no longer invested in her. Elitists mock her feeble attempts to conform to their standards, her intelligence, her dialect. She's shoved into irrelevancy by the industry and system. It's essentially a shorter-term flash-in-the-pan version of the glacial decline Jack Conrad undergoes. It's easy to compare Jack Conrad to Brad Pitt's other character who's been in the industry for so long, Cliff Booth in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I feel that the two characters couldn't be any more different, and I would argue that Pitt gives a more nuanced performance as Jack Conrad in Babylon than he does in his show-stopping turn in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Jack Conrad is the king of silent cinema, whose metaphorical voice is, ironically, about to be silenced by the advent of talkies. He smells a change coming, and while he's outwardly convinced he'll be spearheading the radical change of the form that is imminent, internally, he kinda knows his death knell is upon him. He's getting divorced, which is a recurring situation for him throughout the story, and the depression, which will ultimately take his life in the 30s, has clearly already taken root in his soul. He's tragically coming to realize his disposable place in the Hollywood machine. As charismatic as he is, he spends this party as little more than a wallflower, instead diverting his attention to a beautiful waitress, not only for her flirtations, but because she's willing to be honest with him. He's been fed lies and bullshit by industry people his whole life, and so why would he entertain himself among them when, instead, removed from the coked up crowd of partygoers, he can hook up with this woman who has been sincere with him? But he does so still within viewing distance of the crowd, which emphasizes how he is simultaneously becoming detached from the machine, yet longs to remain part of it. Jack's pedigree comes from a poorer, lower class, and while that's decidedly not where he is by 1926, he's also something of a pretender, grappling with imposter syndrome on the one hand, while trying to maintain an illusion directed at everyone else. And he has a great run, but eventually the illusion breaks when the silent era collapses collapses. What was once popular dies out, and Jack, along with most stars such as Nelly, has a complete inability to adapt to the sound era, or really, he can't adapt because it fundamentally changes who he is. The mystery or facade of Jack Conrad falls when he's exposed for who he's always been, and unfortunately, the uppity moviegoers find his line delivery unconvincing. Jack was playing for the common person, the person who went to the Nickelodeon to find an escape, to be amused, to be entertained. There's beauty there, but it's not what the industry wants. They want to innovate at the expense of everyone else. They want to make new stars, ignite new trends. They want the respect of the theater. Jack doesn't want to accept the fact that he's been rejected, and furthermore detests the lack of honesty from virtually anybody that allowed him to cling to false hope that maybe there's still a chance for a comeback. He tried his best, and sadly, the world doesn't like the real Jack Conrad, the unvarnished one, revealed to the world when his voice can finally be heard and no facet of himself is hidden any longer. His gruffness and rural roots replaced the image of chivalrous charm that had been the public's perception of him. Jack never really made art that he wanted to make, and while the notion that he can live in the minds of audiences forever is true, he only ever got to make films that he views as not fulfilling of his artistic ideals. And so the true Jack Conrad will never live on, and instead the facsimile will be perpetuated. And I think that, more than any of the divorces, more than him being told that his career is shot, is ultimately what drives him to suicide. It's a dark, double-edged sword that Chazelle leaves us with. Yes, artists can live immortally through their art, but maybe it's that pursuit of immortality that is ultimately most fatal. And then there's Sidney Palmer, a trumpet player who's way too talented to be playing at this ridiculous party and should be headlining Carnegie Hall instead, who longs to break free of these awful trash gigs and make a real career in music for himself. He's dissatisfied with his bandmates who aren't nearly on his level because they have to be 10 times as good to stand apart from their white peers, and frustrated at the racial divide that is standing in his way in Hollywood. The same divide that means the only person to give him a proper break is Manny, another person of color. Manny is a great contrast to Sidney as well, in that because Manny started at the absolute bottom, he feels he has to follow the steps exactly, do precisely what the industry demands of him, to be a part of the art form he loves so much. The industry exploits these dreams, forcing Manny to assimilate if he wants even the slightest chance of making it, whereas Sidney wants the same success but refuses to compromise himself or his artistry. And throughout the entire film, we've seen people who continuously compromise themselves and are ruined as a result of it. It's a contrast of approaches which will come to a head when Sidney suffers the humiliation of being told that he's somehow not black enough on screen for audiences in the South perform, coerced by Manny, who was forced to do this by the all-white studio heads, into putting blackface on himself. Sidney compromises this one time and immediately recognizes the cost of a career in showbiz for someone like him. If he hopes to maintain the creative integrity he's held so near and dear to him throughout the film, he has no choice but to leave and terminate his own Hollywood career. And it all brings him right back to playing the kind of gigs that allowed him to be himself, the ones he dismissed as too small but were ultimately home for him. And he's ultimately the one who not only goes out on his own terms, but goes out well, as opposed to Manny, even Jack Conrad and Nellie Leroy, who bend to Hollywood at every turn, only to get chewed up and spat back out after. Sidney is the only one who doesn't give the industry an inch, because, as we see with everyone else, if you give the industry an inch, they'll take a mile and destroy you. And back to the whole opening that sets all of this up. It is so goddamn epic, so unfailingly memorable, so filled to the brim with a snapshot of excess that condemns as much as it awes, that people are probably going to overlook how spectacularly it establishes these four characters and sets up the 2.5 hours that are to come. And that's totally fine. In some ways, it feels intentional. Come for the insanity. Feel bad when the end credits roll that you didn't realize at least 2 of these people were crying for help, if not all 4. But more than that, Chazelle charges straight through the excess, debauchery, and utter chaos of Hollywood, not only exposing the industry for what it was at the advent of talkies, movies in the year of the first Oscars, but condemns it as a place that's still reluctant to change today, still desperately clinging to a bygone era just as much, if not more so, than Jack Conrad was. They say they want to push forward, they say they want to innovate, but what does that really mean? It just feels like the same thing repackaged in different ways. So enjoy the spectacle. Just be prepared for the occasional upside smack as a reminder that not everything was wine and roses for the artists who put that spectacle into celluloid for you. I don't think anything exemplifies that idea better than what I think is the standout sequence of the film, the quiet on set scene. Across 7 takes and an eternal train wreck, Nellie shoots her first scene in a talkie at a time where the industry, hell, the equipment, doesn't know how to do this, can't even figure out how to ventilate its camera booth properly. A camera booth that only exists because the machine is so goddamn noisy that running it out in the open would make filming audio an impossibility. Take 1. Nellie blows the sound levels with her first syllable. Take 2, she overcompensates and comes in way too quiet. Take 3, she misses her mark and the mic doesn't capture her. Margot Robbie is on fire here, by the way. So is editor Tom Cross, because holy shit, this thing has you on the edge of your seat the entire time. The intensity, the hilarity, it's like you don't know whether to laugh, to just scream. It's the anxiety in this scene harkens back to what Chazelle and Tom Cross did in the masterpiece that is Whiplash. And Robbie kills it this whole film, but if there's one scene to land her a Best Actress nomination, I feel like this probably has to be up there. And as things progress, the sound guy repeatedly interrupts, everyone is frustrated, the camera operator is boiling in his booth, the director and the script supervisor on the verge of committing murder, and when they finally get a complete take, they all find out the poor camera operator has either suffocated or died of heat exhaustion. The Hollywood machine beats its production into submission, and it even claims an outright casualty. That, tragically, hasn't stopped happening in the process of movie making. Technological advancements and the boundaries of filmmaking expanding at the cost of the wellness of far too many cast and crew. But while it is thought-provoking, at the end of the day, the quiet on set sequence is nothing short of the funniest scene of the year, and PJ Byrne is part of the reason why. I mean, the guy is just exploding. He's insulting everyone. He's saying he's gonna shit in someone's mouth. I mean, it is, if you've ever been on a film set, you know that tension, you know that aggression and that frustration to get the perfect take and what it costs. God, it's just, that scene is everything. I don't know if I've ever laughed harder, and the best part about it is it's not following that current trend of comedic timing where everything's meta or it's sarcastic or whatever. This is just good old-fashioned situational humor, and it's dark humor, and it's true at times, but man, it's so good. I was in tears. I don't know the last time I've ever laughed that hard in a movie. Damien Chazelle adores movies. He clearly loves making them, even if you think filmmaking is an invariable train wreck based on the way his portrayal of a soundstage unfolds, but he also has no love for the hollow culture of Hollywood as an industry. Fame is a monster. Now, Chazelle's work, while it often romanticizes passion and creativity, always has a slight tinge of cynicism to it. We definitely see that in La La Land, and for sure in First Man, and actually, you know what? We see it in just about all of his films. But La La Land is arguably the most glamorous of his filmography. Babylon highlights the glamour, sure, in single moments, golden hour snapshots, a kiss, a tear, awe-inspiring spectacle and beauty that sear into your mind. But it surrounds that with the utmost disgusting chaos imaginable, because that's really how the sausage is made. Babylon is a film that feels as though it comes from a Chazelle who's seen too much of the industry, that he can't unsee it, and although it's a bleak takeaway, it doesn't take away from his love of moving pictures and those little moments of humanity that make a movie a movie.
You know, my favorite thing about the movie is it feels like a movie.
Hollywood is a duplicitous abyss of spectacle at the expense of practically all else. That's what makes the Tobey Maguire section of the film so great. Some might take it as something of an almost non sequitur in the story, but it's perfectly fitting if you think about how shady the inner workings of Hollywood are, and really any entertainment scene operate. This whole segment of the film shows the underbelly of the industry, people who exploit marginalized people for spectacle, clinging on to the circus, to minstrel shows, things that have become taboo in society. You can't just show these things in the public square anymore, so just move them into an abandoned train tunnel. The people who partake in this are people who are unwilling to change, holding desperately onto the good old days because they were good for them. And Chazelle depicts it as like the party at the beginning of the film, the spectacle you have to see with your own eyes to believe. Although it's not as pretty as it once was. That little odyssey through hell is great because it shows what once was seen as glamorous and beloved has now had its shiny facade removed, and while it's still spectacular, it's instead spectacular in the way a train wreck is. It's a fucking miracle that amidst the chaos, there's still genuine beauty and emotion to uncover. And thank God there's a filmmaker like Damien Chazelle out there to say, hey, look, maybe this thing can be better. He captures that as much as he captures the banality, the evil, the destructive machine of Hollywood. The fact that happy accidents, moments of irreplaceable wonder, can cut through the drug-fueled, verbally abusive, sex-laden minefield is the intricate miracle of Hollywood, and I think that the former is beginning to overcome the latter. I think that's what Chazelle admires most about film. He detests the culture, the seediness, the town, but he's so enamored with the art that comes out of it. The moments that mean something to the people watching them happen on the silver screen. To him, cinema is forever. Well, actually, it's more that cinema is forever regardless of what Damien Chazelle or any other filmmaker thinks. But Chazelle understands that. He knows that it will never die with any one star or artist, no matter how badly Hollywood, the institution, decides to cock it up. Making art that means something, because no matter how hard we try, we're all mortal. Even the brightest of stars will fizzle into obscurity, fade into time, but what they leave behind, their legacy, will live on screen for generations to come. That's the true magic of movies, and that's why what we make matters. When Chazelle made La La Land, he was creating a joyous celebration of Hollywood through music. It seems a lot has changed for Chazelle in the years since. Further exposure to LA has jaded him, though he still maintains a love for cinema and the theatrical experience. We also see the whole remix commentary reflected through the La La Land-esque score. Some familiar story beats, lines spoken 2 degrees removed from iconic dialogue, situations that parallel Boogie Nights or some of Scorsese's work. Even some of Damien's own work is remixed here. It also feels like a response to so many who've accused Damien Chazelle of being a ripoff of quote-unquote greater filmmakers, of being derivative. This is his retort. And I think that's the place where Babylon's stunning finale comes from. I see a lot of Chazelle's viewpoint in Manny, who, by the way, might be brought to screen in the best lead male performance of the year, thanks to Diego Calva. What makes Manny so invaluable to Hollywood isn't just his outsider perspective, it's his infallible ability to adapt to whatever circumstance he finds himself in. For better or worse, he's willing to assimilate in order to get to where he wants to be. He keeps working, changing to keep up with the times while still understanding what makes movies great, until the moment the industry rejects him. And that's the other side of the showbiz coin. It swallows you whole and kills you like it did Jack Conrad and Nellie Leroy, or it spits you out when you're no longer used to it like Manny. Either way, showbiz conquers. It's an industry art form in town that's built on top of people. It exploits and exploits and exploits. The silent era was the ground level, and then they added more floors, sound, then Technicolor, then VFX, and so on and so forth, adding in element after element and pressing down harder on the backs of those who really made it possible.
I may have gone too far in a few places,
while stealing the spotlight and claiming all the credit. Hollywood is a paradoxical industry, one built on progress while insistent upon staying the same. Their band-aid solutions are to simply recycle the same ideas, same methods in new ways, mostly through technological innovation. The industry sees advancements in technology as the way of the future, and yeah, that's true to an extent, because ultimately what it comes down to is the story. If we're only telling stories from the perspective of one kind of person, excluding people of color, people of different social status or sexuality, then the number of color combinations becomes that much smaller. People from those underrepresented groups deserve to have their stories told, even if they aren't too different from ours, if only to tell it from a new perspective, and so someone in the audience can watch a narrative unfold and see themselves in the picture. That's the power of movies, to see someone's own experience, emotions reflected back to them on the screen. Manny's story ends with him in a cinema in 1952 watching Singin' in the Rain captivate an entirely new generation of audiences in real time, whilst the golden era he lived among, the few years of his life where he had everything literally play out in front of him on screen. He watched the jazz singer change everything 25 years earlier, heard Al Jolson speak those magically synchronized words that blew the doors open on what cinema could be, and now he sits there, an old man, and he's watching Gene Kelly revolutionize movies all over again. But he can't even appreciate the film on that level. Instead, Manny breaks down, seeing the lives and legacy of the people he knew and loved, the industry that he was a part of, exploited and built on top of, and become something entirely different. These are real people, his friends, who have been relegated to side characters, caricatures. It's all exploitation. And while the audience might be happily going along with the spectacle, the darkness of Hollywood hasn't gone away. Even that film has stories of Debbie Reynolds being mistreated, stories which echo through the montage of cinema to come, that flashes through Manny's mind in a final burst of editing mastery from Tom Cross. The spectacle of movie making will always be here. It will even become more spectacular, but behind almost every film we see in that montage comes another story of misogyny, of abuse, of drug addiction, of violence, of telling someone else's story. The Hollywood that Manny thrived in, the one he now sits as an old man in, never left and hasn't since. They might try and dress it up and call it something new, but it's the same exact thing. The final scene also reaffirms the idea that film itself is a remix of traditional paint and canvas. That montage shows how cyclical all of this will be. There are only 6 colors, a finite number of combinations among them. Everything that's ever been painted, told, shot, has been done before. The only difference is the artist holding the brush, how that person sees the world, how these colors speak to them and their experience. It's why the theater detests the cinema and vice versa. It's nothing more than an advancement of what theater was. The medium may change, but the colors stay the same. And acknowledging that doesn't mean that Damien Chazelle doesn't believe in movies or that they shouldn't be made anymore because of problematic or cyclical elements of the industry. He knows that he too has benefited from how this machine works. To the contrary, Babylon exudes that movies are forever, that movie making is magic, and that we can still be better to one another and to ourselves while we make it. Even if it's all just a remix, what's the point of remixing if you're not really gonna shake something up? Maybe that's the element we can remix next.